And that's part of what is so emotional for me, because I want to lift all of that off of them, because it's just what God has orchestrated through all of the stuff. So were there things that we could have done differently? Yeah, probably. But would we be where we are now if everything had been done differently? Probably not. And do we love where we are now? Yeah.
For our new series, the Sea Life Media team took to the roads, visiting some of the most influential places in our pastors' lives, as we get to know their stories in a deeper way. And even more importantly, we get to know the story of a lowly shepherd boy who would one day become King of Israel, the Bible's King David. All of this in search for the secret to living a life truly in line with God's favor, searching for clues to our divine destinies, on a journey to find the secret sauce. Today we are headed north to the tiny town of Tecumseh, Oklahoma, with a population of just over 6,000. If you blink, you might miss it. But it is a place of vast importance to one of our co-pastors, Pastor Randy Wade. So this week, we're teaming up with Pastor David Griffin, who will be revisiting this pivotal point in the life of Pastor Randy. While there, they're going to share about family, tragedy, salvation. We'll laugh, we'll cry, and most importantly, we'll look at how Scripture provides a roadmap for how to live a life after God's own heart, through both our choices and our attitudes. So join us as we hop in the car and join David and Randy on the road to Oklahoma.
Welcome to Tecumseh. I saw them using the drone, and I'm wondering if anybody around here has ever seen a drone before.
People are going, we're getting invaded.
The aliens.
We're getting invaded. So we turn around and go the other way. So here we are. This is really like, so there's really, I mean, like as far as Main Street, this is just one street in Tecumseh, is that it?
This is called Broadway, but it's the main street. But there's another street called Main Street that's not Main.
So this is called Broadway. Are there any musicals on here?
No, but there is an opera house.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. What is it? What do they do there? Like Hee Haw?
Now I think they do nothing.
Oh, okay.
But yeah.
Is that where Hee Haw used to be filmed?
Probably. So we'll go up to the light and take a left.
So here we are, Tecumseh. Why Tecumseh? Tell me why we are in this town in Oklahoma. I don't know that I've ever been here. I've been to Shawnee before, but I don't know if I've ever been to Tecumseh. Tell me why we're here.
We are here because this is where I grew up, and so many formative things happened whenever I lived in Tecumseh. I was born in Oklahoma City and was brought home to a home in Shawnee, but very quickly we moved to Tecumseh. So if all the smart people are right, those most formative years happen very early on in life, and this is where all of that happened for me.
So when you think back to those moments, describe your early childhood, and then when did you kind of hit your first spiritual marker?
Yeah, so whenever I think back to childhood, it's interesting because even though my parents were divorced whenever I was, I think, 3 years old, I never felt like either one of my parents was absent, because I lived with my dad and stepmom, but my mom and stepdad would always drive from Texas back to Oklahoma to visit with us every other weekend. And my parents got along, and so I think that was for our benefit, for my brother and I. Lots of spiritual markers in Tecumseh, from where I was saved, where I was called to the ministry. Those all happened in Tecumseh. Even whenever I didn't live here, God brought me back here for some of those moments. And so this place, it's interesting. It holds a really special place in my heart.
So let's talk about the first spiritual marker of salvation. We'll talk about baptism in a moment, but let's talk about salvation and kind of the background of how and when that happened.
Yeah, so I had a friend who lived down the street. His name is David Sparks. He's now a missionary in Spain. And he and I we were just kids. We were just little kids who happened to live on the same dirt road. And we would spend a ton of time, hanging out, riding bikes. There was a hay barn on his parents' property, and they had a little camper. And, we're just kids. And I remember one day asking him, I don't even remember the exact question, but something along the lines of, what in the world is so different about your family? It feels like y'all go to church all the time. Why do y'all go to church? Just asking kid questions. I didn't really understand what the difference was. And I think we were 9 years old, and David led me to the Lord as a 9-year-old kid. And so I remember he said, when you go home, you need to tell your parents. And I wasn't real sure how it would be received. We weren't church people necessarily. We were kind of in church and then out of church and then in church. So I went home and I told my stepmom, I said, I prayed to receive Christ. I asked God to forgive me of my sin. And she's like, are you sure? And she was actually happy for me, which was really cool. And she ran me to this church where we're sitting now to meet with the pastor, because she said, I want to be sure somebody talks to you about this. Who
had to get it blessed.
You have to get it kind of pastorally approved. And so we did. We met, and then this is actually, we're sitting in the church where I was later baptized.
Same painting in the baptistry?
Exact same painting in the baptistry. And going and looking around, I think maybe the robes that we used whenever I was a kid are still hanging up back there. So yeah, it's very cool.
So receive Christ, get baptized. God obviously has a plan for your life, but it took some time. It took some waiting to kind of get to that next step. Talk about that for a moment.
So a lot of stuff happened, and I want to be really, really careful in this part of it, because I would never. This will make me emotional. I don't. I would not trade my childhood for anything. I have a really strong fear of dishonoring my mom and dad, and I don't want to do that, because I wouldn't change anything. Is important that it is said that even though my parents were divorced, they were both present in my life, which was a real blessing. And whenever I hit this moment where I recognized it was time to leave Oklahoma and to go move to Texas to live with my mom and stepdad, that was an incredibly difficult decision. I didn't even necessarily know that it was God doing it. We just felt like we needed to. So we left our house. We always rode our bikes to school. And we left our house one morning early. And we didn't want to hurt our dad, so we just chose not to tell him. I don't know if that was the right decision or not, but we always would ride our bikes to school. And so we rode a little early that day to the Love's gas station here in town, and there was a payphone. We did a collect call to Texas and told my mom it was time, and she said, okay, well, we're on our way. And so she and my stepdad left Texas, drove to Oklahoma. My brother and I went to school. We didn't know what was happening. All we knew is we had triggered something, and we didn't know what it was going to turn into. It wasn't very long after that they called us to the front office and just said, your dad's here to pick you up. And the sinking feeling, I don't think I'll ever, I hope to never feel that again. I'll never forget it, because I thought, now I have to face him, and I know I've hurt him, and I didn't ever want to hurt him. But we did hurt him, and we didn't mean to. And when we went out to the truck, he was putting our bicycles in the back, and he didn't say anything all the way home. And my mom and stepdad met us there, and we packed up as much as we could, and that was the last day, and that I lived here. Felt like we were doing what God wanted us to do, even though we didn't really know how to give him credit for it. Fast forward, despite feeling like we really hurt him, I think I was 20, and he was working on a car. I was watching because I'm not very mechanical. But he looked up, and my biological dad said to me about my stepdad, he said, your dad is a really good man. And he said that was one of the hardest things whenever you boys moved, but he said it was the right decision. And he said you wouldn't be where you are today if you wouldn't have moved to Texas. And so that was a real gift from God to give me that, because all of the concern that I had about hurting him, I realized it did hurt, but God had redeemed it.
Well, then you mentioned a moment ago that God, to some degree, redeemed this whole place and this pain, that this becomes the place where you feel like God set you apart specifically for ministry. I know He doesn't set everyone apart for ministry, but really kind of His purpose, intent, and plan for your life became clear in this place as well.
Yeah, so I was 16, so we had not lived here for about 4 years, and we had come to visit, and I was staying at my dad's house, and it was one night. I'd always thought I was going to be a pediatrician, and I'd always knew that when I would tell people that, it didn't feel right, but I didn't really know why it didn't feel right. And I was here. I was actually in Tecumseh, and for 3 or 4 hours, late into the night, early into the morning, wrestled with God and told Him, I said, if you'll just leave me alone. I don't even know what it means to be called in the ministry, but if that's what you want, I will abandon the whole pediatric thing. If I'm supposed to work at a church, I didn't have really a strong footing in terms of what it meant to even be in the ministry. But I told him, I said, if you'll just leave me alone, I'll do anything you want me to do. And people think I'm joking about it, but I did put one little, thing in there that I was like, I'll do anything except teach. I don't want to be in front of people. I don't think that's my calling. And because I was a super introverted, awkward kid. But I walked away from the whole pediatric thing, and I remember I didn't tell anybody for about 3 weeks, and had gone back to Texas. And I'd been going to a Church of the Nazarene, and the pastor about 3 weeks later, after a Sunday service, said, "Hey, Randy, would you come in my office? I've got a question for you." I got in his office, and he said, I've felt like for about the past 3 weeks I was supposed to ask you a question, but I keep forgetting. And he said, this may feel like it's coming out of nowhere, but have you ever considered going into the ministry? At that point, I just knew that it wasn't the enchiladas I had for dinner that was keeping me up in the house on Main. It was the Spirit of God.
Did you have any idea, you're starting down a path, did you have any idea where it might take you? Obviously, you thought it wasn't going to be teaching.
No idea. I've always been really comfortable behind the scenes, no real personality need to be in front of people or anything like that. I thought maybe it was going to be worship ministry. I did an internship at Columbus Avenue in Waco and realized very quickly I was not gifted enough in that. And it wasn't until really I was still fighting against the whole idea of teaching whenever you hired me to serve at First Baptist Sunnyvale. I just thought I was going to be the junior high associate. Somebody else would do the teaching. I could do the behind the scenes. And then I think it was like 3 or 4 weeks in, you told me, hey, I hope you've been paying attention because we're getting ready to split junior high and senior high, and you're going to be teaching the junior high every week. And I remember going home thinking, this is not what I thought I was signing up for.
So, we've been talking about David, and we've been talking about, his attitude. But I feel like you always had that attitude of, wherever God sent you, sometimes via circumstances that you were going to I don't know if the word excel is the right word, but you were going to give it your best effort. Have you always felt that way, or is that a hallmark? Do people tell you that's a hallmark of you, or what? That you're tenacious, that you...
Yes, that I'm tenacious. I don't know that it's a hallmark that I always had the best attitude. I think I've had a really charmed life. I've had a really charmed ministry. And yeah, in terms of attitude, there's no possible way I would be where I'm at doing what I'm doing if I hadn't hit a few hurdles in Tecumseh and in Mount Pleasant and in Waco and at Sunnyvale and at Sea Life. I mean, all of those things have been used to shape me. I didn't realize whenever I was a kid who was worried about hurting a parent, or as an adult who's worried about, I don't want to hurt either one of my parents, because God used all of it. He's redeemed all of it. Not everybody gets to say that. My dad walks with the Lord. My mom walks with the Lord. So I look at it and I go, yeah, it's kind of a crazy way to get there, but He redeemed it.
Do you think that both of them might say that those really difficult times, which obviously they were, and you know that they would say that that's part of their redemption story, that even that pain, even some of the decisions maybe that you and Jimmy made and those things, that all of that was working together, or God, it may not have been good at the time, but he worked it for good? Would they say that now?
Yes, they would say it now. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it was hard, and it was heartbreaking in a lot of places and a lot of times. And I think at times they've even felt guilty, and I get that now as a parent. And that's part of what is so emotional for me, because I want to lift all of that off of them, because it's just what God has orchestrated through all of the stuff. So were there things that we could have done differently? Yeah, probably. But would we be where we are now if everything had been done differently? Probably not. And do we love where we are now? Yeah. Yeah. So all of this, from riding the bike to the school, to stopping at the gas station to make the phone call, to wrestling with God at night in terms of the call to ministry, I didn't know it at the time, but it was a ministry internship that I didn't know I had signed up for.
Yeah, and so obviously that would be similar to David sitting out in a field after he has this great moment where Samuel anoints him as king, and then he finds himself right back in the field tending sheep and carrying food to his brothers, and I mean, there had to be moments along the way that he had to keep that attitude, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's feels like a stretch to do too strong of a comparison between someone anointed as a king and a kid from Tecumseh that gets to co-pastor a church.
Unless we believe that every person has an anointing, that God has a purpose for every single person.
I do believe that, and I'm glad that you clarified that. And I guess that would be my hope, is that somebody who is watching this and whatever, and they feel like, well, there's some carnage, there's some brokenness, there's some hard memories, there's some bitterness, there are things that are hard to forgive. I would just encourage people to look at what happened in David's life. Yeah, look at what happened in my life and story, and imagine what could happen in your life and story if you trusted that the God who has redeemed you wants to redeem all of it.
And even if he did, you say this oftentimes, I think we heard it at the same conference for the first time, about the process.
Between the promise and the payoff, there's a process.
You are in the process, even in that moment. So, even you go back to your salvation, I'm talking even before your calling, even to go back to your salvation, there's quite a process that's gotten you here.
Yeah.
That God had a plan for you from that day, when you get in the waters right there behind you, to go public with that faith, and now you go public with that faith every single Sunday.
Yeah, we could have lived anywhere, we could have moved anywhere, and my dad and granddad could have built the house that I grew up in anywhere, but they built it on Old Santa Fe Lake Road, which was just down the road from David Sparks and Betty and Ray Sparks, and that's where I think there was just this kind of catalytic event that I didn't know at the moment was going to be a catalytic event, that a kid telling his friend about Jesus would have turned into this. I couldn't see it then. No, there's no possible way. No, there's no possible way I could have imagined.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing that with us today. I know that a lot of that is really intimate, but I think a lot of people are going to be moved, because many people think that the problems in their lives that they're experiencing, the setbacks that they're experiencing in their lives, they feel like that those are insurmountable, that God can't redeem their story, that somehow or another they've gotten derailed.
Yeah.
But you're saying that if you stay faithful, have that trusting attitude throughout, that God can redeem all things.
He will redeem, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Today we dove even deeper into Pastor Randy's childhood, his salvation, and some really tough decisions that he had to make along the way. Have you ever found yourself having to make a really difficult decision? Maybe it was agonizing at the time, but you knew God was calling you to do something difficult. And what role did attitude, having the right attitude, play in making that decision? These would be some great questions to start discussing with your community group. Then go ahead and look at that passage, 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 14 through 18, and talk about how David needed to show the proper attitude of faith in order to follow God. It wasn't easy, but he demonstrates something that I think is really beautiful for us to emulate. So talk through that with your group. What does that look like in your own life, and how can you have just that, an attitude of faith? Well, we hope that this journey with Pastor David and Pastor Randy has really been inspirational for you, has brought up some difficult talking points, but some good talking points. And as always, you can find a discussion guide in the link below that will have all these questions and more. And until next time, we hope that you'll join us to find out just what is the secret sauce. We'll see you then.